thank you for joining me today here at the Masonic Temple in Philadelphia for the May presentation of the Masonic Library and Museum's Speaker Series. My name is Brother Matthew McGovern. I'm a past master of University Lodge number 51, and it is my privilege to be able to present to you all today. Brother Samuel Clemens is once quoted to have said that patriotism is supporting your country all the time and your government when it deserves it. For many Freemasons, patriotism is a major factor in their lives, both within the fraternity and without. But what makes one a patriot? Is it passion? Is it service or sacrifice? Is it adherence to certain values or the embracing of certain ideals? There are about as many different definitions of patriotism as there are individuals who could be ascribed the title patriot. But for many, to paraphrase Brother Potter Stewart, we know it when we see it, and we see it regularly in those whom we would call revolutionaries. For ours is, most assuredly, a revolutionary fraternity. From the time that any man in the United States becomes a Mason, and in truth, often beforehand, one of the most discussed aspects of Masonic history is that of the Founding Fathers, revolutionaries, who were members of the fraternity. They are men with familiar faces and even more familiar names. Men whose legendary deeds and willingness to stand up to what they understood to be the tyranny of an unelected despot, exercising his will over their lands and their fellows, from a throne located some 3,000 miles across the ocean, made an indelible impact on the lives of billions who would not be born for centuries. The Masonic affiliations and histories of some of these men are well known to us. The most famous American Revolutionary Mason, likely one of, if not the most famous Masons in global history, was Brother George Washington, who was made a Mason at age 20 in the Lodge at Fredericksburg, now Fredericksburg Lodge number 4, in 1752. Brother Washington was a dedicated Mason, subscribing to the ideals of fraternity with gusto, and frequently engaging in Masonic correspondence throughout his private life and public career, the details of which are likely well known to all present. He later went on to serve as Warrant Master of Alexandria Lodge number 22, now Alexandria Washington Lodge number 22, when it reconstituted itself as a Virginia Lodge in 1788, having received its original warrant from the Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania as Alexandria Lodge number 39 in 1783. While serving as president, one of Brother Washington's personal projects became choosing the location for a permanent national capital city, a natural decision for a man whose first career was that of a surveyor. After having selected the site of the present-day District of Columbia on the banks of the Potomac River, not far from his own home in Mount Vernon, Brother Washington is famous for laying the cornerstone of the United States Capitol in a Masonic ceremony on September 18, 1793, in full Masonic regalia. In December of that year, while living in Philadelphia, Brother and Lady Washington are recorded as having contributed to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania's relief charity return to his beloved home at Mount Vernon, where he died on December 14, 1799. 4 days later, he was the recipient of a Masonic funeral, as well as various memorials around the country, including here in Philadelphia, and the nation's capital, where the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania took a prominent part in his official national funeral. The second most famous American Revolutionary Mason is undoubtedly Brother Benjamin Franklin, a past Grand Master of the modern Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, serving in that office in 1734 at the remarkably young age of 28, and again in 1749. A printer by trade, Brother Franklin was responsible for printing James Anderson's Constitution of the Freemasons in 1732, the first edition of the first Masonic book printed in the New World. During his tenure as America's first minister to France, Brother Franklin attended and served as Venerable Master of Loge de Neuf Sœurs, the Lodge of the Nine Sisters. During the same year Brother Franklin was accepted as a member, Voltaire and John Paul Jones also joined the lodge. When Franklin died in 1790, owing to his status as a modern Mason, and the subsequent subsumption of the moderns by the ancients in Pennsylvania during his time in Paris, his death went unremarked upon by the then independent Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, and he was not accorded a Masonic funeral service. However, in the centuries since his death, Brother Franklin's Masonic reputation has been rehabilitated. He has been embraced by the fraternity, both here in Pennsylvania and elsewhere. In fact, the highest honor accorded by the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania is its Franklin Medal, seen here. Other famous American revolutionaries who were Masons include Most Worshipful Brother Joseph Warren, who was serving as Grand Master of the Provincial Grand Laws of Massachusetts at the time of his death at the Battle of Bunker Hill in 1775. Brothers John Hancock, first made a Mason in Quebec in Beauchamp, number 277 in 1762, Samuel Adams, and James Otis, who all belonged to the same lodge as Most Worshipful Brother Warren, the Lodge of St. Andrew in Boston. Most Worshipful Brother Paul Revere, who served as Grand Master of Masons of Massachusetts in 1795, and who also, as a professional silversmith, crafted sterling silver working tools for several Massachusetts lodges still in use today. Brother Richard Montgomery, a member of Unity Lodge number 18, originally held in the 17th Regiment of Foot under a traveling military warrant granted by the Provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania for the Revolution, and vacated in 1786 upon the Grand Lodge's independence. And Brother John Marshall, later the 4th Chief Justice of the United States, who claims to have been initiated into the craft in Pennsylvania while wintering with the Continental Army at Valley Forge, and who served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Virginia from 1793 to 1795. Despite sometimes being lumped or even painted into the list of revolutionary American Masons, there is no proof that many American founding fathers were members of the fraternity. Those who are regularly misattributed Masonic status include Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and Patrick Henry. Hamilton was included in the painting The Petition by John Ward Dunsmore, which depicts the December 27, 1799 meeting of American Union Lodge, also known as Military Union Lodge Number 1, in Morristown, New Jersey, to discuss a petition presented by General and Brother Mordecai Gist to form a General Grand Lodge of the United States, with Brother Washington as General Grand Master. Jefferson participated in the ceremony of laying the cornerstone of the University of Virginia, which was conducted by Freemasons, but he did so as one of the 6 visitors, or governors, of the university, not as a Master Mason. Despite their illustrious nature and their affiliation with so many Freemasons, there is no evidence that either were ever initiated into the craft. Beyond the borders of the United States, Masons have played vital roles in numerous revolutionary struggles that followed the American Revolution. Today, I'd like to spend some time discussing those Masons and the roles that they played in shaping the world of the 18th and 19th centuries. A revolutionary figure on, and the hero of, 2 continents, Gilbert de Mottier, Marquis de Lafayette, was just 19 years old when he sailed from France to the United States on April 26, 1777, looking for glory in a revolution which he considered to be noble. Though quite young, he was commissioned a Major General by the Continental Congress soon after his arrival on July 31st of that same year, though only after offering to serve without pay. According to Masonic scholars in France, he need not have been made a Mason, however, having already been initiated into the fraternity in France before his 18th birthday, possibly in Loge de Saint-Jean de la Candeur or Loge Contrat Social, both of which met in Paris. If this was the case, Brother Lafayette's status as a Freemason likely helped to open numerous doors for him in America, and historian Mark Leibson posits that it is this status, along with his conviviality and passion, that caused Brother Washington to think well of him so quickly after their meeting, and which helped their lifelong friendship to Germany. There is also speculation among American Masonic historians Brother Lafayette was initiated into an American military lodge, perhaps American Union Lodge, in Morristown, New Jersey, or perhaps at Valley Forge, with Washington serving as master of the lodge. This position is supported by at least one quote from Brother Lafayette himself, who is noted as having said, quote, "After I was made a Mason, George Washington seemed to have received a new light. I never had, from that moment, any cause to doubt his entire confidence. It was not long before I had a separate command of great importance." Regardless of when and where he was made a Mason, Brother Lafayette's Masonic status is not in doubt. He later became a member of Holland Lodge No. 8, and the Grand Lodge of New York tells us that he also became a Royal Archmason in Jerusalem Chapter No. 8 in New York City on September 12, 1824, a Knight Templar in Wharton Commandery No. 4, and a member of Columbian Commandery No. 1, both of New York City, and was made a 33rd degree Mason and honorary Grand Commander of the Cerneau Supreme Council of New York of the Scottish Rite. After the American Revolution, Lafayette returned to France, where he became intrinsically involved with the French Revolution, serving as a member of King Louis XVI's Estates General in 1789, which became the National Assembly. Consulting with Jefferson, then America's minister to France and a close friend, Brother Lafayette was the primary author of the initial draft of the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which he presented to the Assembly, which they later heavily modified. He also originated the French tricolor, red, white, and blue, when he suggested the Parisian red and blue be combined with the royal white to create the cockade worn by the members of the Paris National Guard, of which he was acclaimed commander-in-chief. After the storming and fall of the Bastille, the demolition of which he ordered, Brother Lafayette sent one of its numerous keys to the United States in the care of Thomas Payne, who passed it to Brother John Rutledge of South Carolina in London, by whom it was delivered to Washington, who had a special case for its display constructed and hung in a foyer of Mount Vernon, where it still hangs today. Brother Lafayette later presented a second key to the Brethren of Alexandria, Washington Lodge No. 22, during his famed tour of the United States. After King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette escaped the palace where they were being held under the eyes and protection of the National Guard, Brother Lafayette and his men retrieved them and escorted them back to the palace. Men such as Robespierre called Lafayette a royalist and a traitor for protecting the king, which damaged his public perception. His public standing was further damaged after the Champ de Mars massacre, during which Brother Lafayette was nearly assassinated, but the gunman's pistol misfired. Resigning from the National Guard not long after, Brother Lafayette returned home in 1791, was promoted to the rank of Lieutenant General, and was given command of one of the three armies engaged against Austro-Prussian forces in the War of the First Coalition. But the issuance of the Brunswick Manifesto, which stated that Austrian and Prussian armies would loot and burn Paris if the French royal family was harmed, may have served as the death knell for Louis and Marie Antoinette, with the monarchy abolished just weeks later, and both king and queen executed in the following months, as well as a warrant being issued for Brother Lafayette's arrest, causing him to flee to the Austrian Netherlands in hopes of escaping to the United States, which had made him a citizen in recognition of his revolutionary service. Lafayette was arrested by the Austrians and remained a prisoner until 1797, later using the distraction of Napoleon Bonaparte's 1799 coup to slip back into France, from which he had been exiled. Bonaparte later granted him the right of residence in France if he pledged to retire from politics, before fully restoring his citizenship in 1800. Brother Lafayette repeatedly turned down a seat in the newly established French Senate, and the Legion of Honor offered to him by the then consul for life. He did not participate in the plebiscite which gave Napoleon the emperorship of France. After the Bourbon Restoration, Brother Lafayette returned to the United States in 1824 for a multi-year grand tour, the centerpiece of which were the national 50th birthday celebrations in 1826, and during which he laid a number of cornerstones in Masonic ceremonies. Brother Lafayette was intimately involved with the July Revolution of 1830 in France, during which he refused to be proclaimed ruler of France by the Chamber of Deputies, but instead saw the Duc d'Orléans crowned as Louis Philippe I. Lafayette remained a member of the Chamber of Deputies until his death in 1834. He was buried in Picpus Cemetery in Paris, under soil from Bunker Hill. He was the subject of extensive official mourning in the United States, where he received the same official period and style of mourning that Brother Washington received 35 years earlier. This may have been due to the fact the President of the United States at the time was Andrew Jackson, a past Grand Master of Masons in Tennessee. Though Lafayette was the most famous revolutionary French Mason, he was far from the only one to participate in it. Coming from a family of minor nobility, Brother Jean-Jacques Regis de Cambacérès made a Mason in 1775 in Loge les Amis Fidèles, was elected to represent Hérolde at the National Convention of September 1792, which abandoned the monarchy, ended the Ancien Régime, and proclaimed the First French Republic. Brother Cambacérès filled various governmental roles at various stages of the revolution, including as a member of the infamous Committee on Public Safety, though only after the fall of Robespierre, before supporting the coup that brought General Bonaparte to power as first consul of France, for whom he served as second consul for the remainder of the French Republic's existence. Eventually ennobled as the Duc de Payne, Brother Cambacérès was, in essence, the second in command of Napoleonic France. The emperor later charged him with monitoring Freemasonry in France, owing in part, perhaps, to the fraternity's reputation of counting revolutionaries amongst its members. And Brother Cambacérès served as an assistant to Joseph Bonaparte for 10 years, while the latter was Grand Master of the Grand Orient of France. There has been speculation that Napoleon himself was a Mason, but he was later recorded as saying, quote, "Freemasonry is a pile of imbeciles who assemble for good cheer and for the execution of many ridiculous follies. Nevertheless, they carried out good actions from time to time." End quote. So this possibility seems unlikely. Nevertheless, more than 1,000 lodges were warranted during Brother Cambacérès' tenure, and he is in no small part responsible for the rebirth of French Freemasonry in the aftermath of the Revolution. Another member of the National Assembly was Brother Joseph Ignace Guillotine, a member of Revolutionary France's National Assembly, the suggester of the location of the tennis court oath taken by members of that assembly, and the namesake of the guillotine, for which he was the epithet, due to his opposition to capital punishment, which he had previously attempted and failed to have abolished. This led Brother Guillotine to instead propose that all execution should be by mechanical decapitation rather than by axe or sword, as a quick and merciful death offered to any convicted citizen, regardless of status or wealth, as commoners had up until that time generally been hanged. Brother Guillotine was initiated into Freemasonry in 1765, served as Venerable Master of Loge de la Concorde Fraternelle, and was for a number of years a deputy of the Grand Lodge of France, in addition to assisting with the birth of the Grand Orient of France, now considered a regular by the United Grand Lodge of England and most other Grand Lodges worldwide, including the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Claude Emmanuel de Pastoret served as Venerable Master of Le Neuf-Sur in the years immediately preceding the French Revolution, and served as a member of the Legislative Assembly from 1791 to 1792. An advocate for separating Louis XVI as a man from the cause of the French monarchy itself, after the monarchy's collapse, Brother Pastoret fled Paris until after the fall of Robespierre. Louis XVIII ennobled him as the Marquis de Pastoret, but with his refusal to swear loyalty to Louis Philippe I after the July Revolution, Brother Pastoret politically faded into obscurity. If we cross the Atlantic again, in the aftermath of both the American and French revolutions, we find a world that is influenced by them, with numerous revolutionary conflicts both inspired and enabled by these two initial major revolutions. Let us first look to the Greater Antilles and the island of Hispaniola, whereupon we will find the enslaved population of the French colony of Saint-Domingue, inspired by the revolution taking place in France and aided by free people of color, throwing off their colonial shackles in a revolution that lasts for more than a decade, establishing the independent nation of Haiti in what historians consider to be the only truly successful large-scale slave rebellion in history. Though we cannot definitively be sure of any Haitian revolutionary Masons at the time of the revolution itself, more on that later, Freemasonry was so intertwined with the local government and culture of the colony that the rulers of a newly independent Haiti essentially inherited the craft, along with rule of their half of the island. Based on the evidence that exists, for example, the sword and scabbard of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, proclaimed Emperor Jacques I in 1804, engraved with the square and compass motif. Most, if not all, of Haiti's later 19th century presidents and emperors were likely members of the craft. Another ruler, Fatime Elie Suluk, who fought in the revolution as a freed slave and was later made a Mason, ruled Haiti from 1849 to 1859 as its proclaimed emperor, Fatime I, and was presented this sword by the Grand Lodge of Haiti. You can see the square and compass motif prominently displayed on it. In fact, Joseph Cerneau, yes, that Joseph Cerneau, was a pre-revolutionary French colonial Freemason, though he fled Saint-Domingue for Cuba due to the uprising, where he helped establish one of its earliest lodges, and later created chaos and disharmony within the fraternity generally, and the Scottish Rite in particular. Moving beyond the islands of the Caribbean, we find ourselves on the shores of Latin America, where a series of wars of independence between 1808 and 1833 essentially ended the Spanish Empire's dominion over Central and South America. The central figure of many of these wars of independence was, unsurprisingly, a Freemason. Simón Bolívar, el Libertador, was born into a wealthy Creole family in Venezuela in 1783, before losing both of his parents at a young age. Eventually, Bolívar, like so many wealthy and high-ranking members of Spanish-American society, traveled to Spain for an education. It was here, at age 20, that he was initiated into Freemasonry in Cadiz in 1803 as a member of the Logia de los Caballeros Racionales, the Lodge of the Rational Knights, which was the mother lodge of many other notable Spanish-American revolutionaries, sometimes known as a Lautaro Lodge. Brother Bolívar would remain an entered apprentice for 2 years before being passed as a fellow craft mason in 1805 in the Lodge of St. Alexander of Scotland in Paris, France, where he would be subsequently raised as a master mason. It is also in France that Brother Bolívar may have received his Scottish Rite degrees and become a member of the Knights Templar. In the mid-1820s, Joseph Cerneau proclaimed Brother Bolívar a 33rd degree Mason of the Cerneau Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in New York, but no evidence of his actual receipt of the degree exists. Once he returned to South America, Brother Bolívar founded 2 lodges, Protectora de las Virtudes Número 1 in Venezuela, of which he also served as master, and Order and Liberty Lodge Number 2 in Peru. After returning to Venezuela, Brother Bolívar, alongside his mentor and fellow Freemason, Francisco de Miranda, whom I will discuss in more detail in a few minutes, became involved with the revolutionary First Republic of Venezuela, which declared its independence from Spain on July 5, 1811. The next year, Brother Miranda became the dictator or supreme chief of Venezuela, but attempted to flee on a British ship after the defeat of the Venezuelan Republican Army, and was subsequently accused of treason by Brother Bolívar in the aftermath of political and economic upheaval, as well as a literal, devastating earthquake, signing an armistice with the Spanish royalists. Brother Miranda would be imprisoned by Spanish royalist forces for the rest of his life, dying in 1860, while Brother Bolívar would go on to serve as president of both the Second and Third Republics of Venezuela. Brother Bolívar would also be a pivotal figure in the founding of the Gran Colombia, a republican conglomeration of territories that would include modern-day Colombia, Ecuador, Venezuela, and Panama, along with portions of Peru, Guyana, and Brazil. Brother Bolívar served as president of the Gran Colombia from 1819 to 1830. During the same period, he served as president of the newly independent autonomous Bolivia in 1825, and of Peru from 1824 to 1827. Brother Bolívar died of tuberculosis in December of 1830. Bernardo Higgins, the supreme dictator of newly independent Chile from 1817 to 1823, was first introduced to Freemasonry and its ideals by Brother Miranda in London. Before the year 1802, while completing his studies, joining the latter's Great American Reunion Lodge, which Brother Miranda established while in exile, which was similar to the Untitled Lodge of Cadiz. It was here that he became exposed in a notable manner to the American ideals of independence, which he took with him when he returned to Chile. Upon his return, Brother Higgins became deeply involved in the Chilean independence movement, including crossing the Andes in the company of another potential revolutionary Freemason, the Argentinian general José de San Martin. Over the course of his tenure as supreme dictator, Brother O'Higgins began to propose ever more radical changes to Chilean society, which began to alienate various groups and powerful supporters within Chilean society, such as powerful landowners, angry at his proposals of democracy and the abolition of nobility, and the church, which caused the government to go bankrupt and ultimately led to a coup that saw Brother O'Higgins ousted and replaced by Ramon Freire, one of his one-time closest ally. Brother O'Higgins was exiled from Chile and ended up in Peru, where he assisted Brother Bolivar in the struggle for independence. It was in Peru that Brother O'Higgins died of cardiac-related issues in 1842. Finally, José de San Martin, the Argentinian military commander and revolutionary, may also have been a Mason, as is vigorously and proudly claimed by the Grand Lodge of Argentina. He is said to have been made a Mason in Integrity Lodge of Cadiz, later joining Logia de los Caballeros Racionales número 3, where he was raised. The Grand Lodge of Argentina also states that he helped found Rational Knights Lodge number 7 in London, as well as Lautaro Lodges in Buenos Aires and Mendoza, and that he served as Venerable Master of the Lodge of the Army of the Andes, along with founding Peace and Perfect Union Lodge number 1, Grand Lodge of Peru in Lima. After his time in Peru, Brother San Martin intended to return and live in the state of Cuyo, Argentina, but due to the ongoing Argentine civil wars, moved to Europe with his daughter and lived in Scotland and Brussels, where he attended multiple lodges, one of which supposedly minted a silver medal in his honor. Brother San Martin died in his home in Boulogne-sur-Mer. He was buried until 1880, when his remains were repatriated to Argentina and buried in the Metropolitan Cathedral in Buenos Aires. Though, as a suspected Freemason, the church saw fit to situate his mausoleum outside the main nave of the church. Making our way back to Europe, we find ourselves embroiled in the midst of a series of wars on independence and unification in what today are the nations of Germany and Italy. In these wars, the most central Masonic figure of note was undoubtedly Giuseppe Garibaldi, the George Washington of Italy. Garibaldi was 21 years old when he joined his first revolutionary party, La Giovine Italia, or Young Italy, and 24 years old when he took part in his first insurrection. Tried in absentia after fleeing across the border from Piedmont to Marseille, Garibaldi was sentenced to death and lived in exile for the next 14 years. It was during this time in exile that he was initiated into the fraternity in 1844, at 37 years of age, in L'Asile de la Virtud Lodge in Montevideo, Uruguay, an irregular Brazilian lodge unrecognized by any mainstream international Masonic Grand Lodge or Orient. The same year, Brother Garibaldi was regularized when he joined Loge des Amis de la Patrie, also in Montevideo, which operated under a warrant of the Grand Orient of France. Though not enamored with the ritual or esoterica of Freemasonry, Brother Garibaldi valued the progressive nature of the Freemasons he encountered, along with the global community it brought him. Emboldened by the Italian state-level revolutions of 1848, Brother Garibaldi returned to Italy, and after shopping around his services as a revolutionary and leader, lent his support to the fledgling Roman Republic, what was then the Papal States. Brother Garibaldi led Roman forces against the French armies sent by then President of France, Louis Napoleon, ultimately failing to prevent the French from taking Rome. Following this defeat, Brother Garibaldi was forced into exile again and emigrated to the United States to purchase a merchant ship, which he would captain in order to make money, while his political goals, those being the dissolution of the Papal States and an elimination of the temporal political power of the Pope, along with the unification of Italy, were out of reach. Ending up in New York, Brother Garibaldi visited various Masonic lodges and bodies while employed as a chandler or candlemaker on Staten Island, Eventually, he made his way back to South America, and then to the United Kingdom, where he also attended various lodges, before returning to Italy in 1854 to farm. He also participated in the Second Italian War of Independence in 1859. In 1860, Brother Garibaldi and his red-shirted Garibaldini embarked upon the Expedition of the Thousand, an action which saw him conquer the island of Sicily and help propel King Vittorio Emanuele II of Sardinia to eventually become King of Italy the following year. Also in 1860, Brother Garibaldi was raised, and in 1862 proclaimed Grand Master of the Supreme Council of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite in Palermo. In 1864, Brother Garibaldi briefly served as the Grand Master of the Grand Orient of Italy, having been previously proclaimed First Italian Freemason by that body, until it became clear that the influence on the fraternity of his nomination and service was antithetical to the goal of depoliticizing Italian Freemasonry. He was later elected Honorary Grand Master in 1867. Details of his later Masonic career are somewhat unclear, but there are records in the archives of the Grand Orient of Italy which state that Brother Garibaldi conferred Masonic degrees on women, a much debated topic then, as now. Brother Garibaldi died in 1882 and is commemorated internationally with several lodges named in his honor, including the famous Garibaldi Lodge number 542 of the Grand Lodge of New York, whose members wear red shirts in honor of the Garibaldini, and which conducts its degree work in Italian. Many revolutionaries may have been Masons, or were, at the very least, Masonic adjacent due to their social and military affiliations, and were therefore influenced by those who subscribed to the tenets of Freemasonry. Thomas Payne, well known for authoring the pamphlets Common Sense and The American Crisis, is often assumed to have been a Freemason, owing to his authorship of An Essay on the Origin of Freemasonry, in which he claims Freemasonry descended from Druidism, and which was also heavily critical of organized religion, with Christianity being a particular focus. However, no evidence has ever been found for his initiation into the fraternity. Perhaps it, like Payne's bones, has been lost forever to the ravages of time. Another major figure often assumed to be a Freemason is General Toussaint Louverture, hero and leader of the Haitian Revolution, and father of Haiti. Much of the speculation surrounding Louverture's status as a Mason is due to the signature that he appended to numerous documents over the course of the Revolution, which included so-called Masonic points. The dots and lines you can see here. Dr. John Garrigus, scholar of the Haitian Revolution and professor of history at the University of Texas at Arlington, in his essay, A Secret Brotherhood? The Question of Black Freemasonry Before and After the Haitian Revolution, has concluded, based on analysis of the signatures of dozens of high-ranking members of Haitian society, other free men of color, and revolutionaries active in Haiti at the same time as Louverture, that given the lack of evidence of membership in any body by Louverture and other leaders of the revolution, and the presence of the marks in the signatures of biracial and white men who were both Freemasons and elite members of society, that Louverture and others like him cannot be assumed to have been Freemasons of an undocumented lodge, or part of the secret network of Freemasons of color that influenced the revolution, but rather that they were attempting to make themselves seen as member of the elite governing class of Saint-Denis. The Lautaro lodges, which I have referenced several times in discussing the Masonic revolutionaries of South America, originated with Brother Miranda in London, and were designed to be a network of lodges wherein revolutionary ideals would germinate and grow in those who were to return to South America with European educations, which were ostensibly to be used in the governance of, and for the betterment of, Spain's colonial empire. Given that brothers Miranda, San Martin, and O'Higgins were all Lautarians, the designs of the Lautaro were undeniably successful. But were these lodges truly Masonic? This is still up for debate, but given the Masonic legacy and memberships of many of the Lautarians, we can safely assume that even if the Lodauto lodges themselves were not Masonic. These men already were, or later went on to become members of, the fraternity. As you can see, Freemasonry has touched the lives and minds of many figures who made indelible marks on their world, which in turn had unquestionable and outright influences on the world in which we live today. By standing up to tyranny and injustice, by throwing off the shackles of colonialism and chattel slavery, and by creating new and enduring nations out of the chaos and uproar of the revolutionary era of the 18th and 19th centuries. Our patriotic brethren have brought the values of liberté, égalité, fraternité, of brotherly love, relief, and truth, of our ancient and honorable fraternity to unknowable and uncountable millions. A revolutionary fraternity. Thank you.